Hey guys, it's me, Amaterasu, back with another What If. This is part 1 to a new series, What If Deku Was a Villain, by Stig92. Anyways, roll the intro.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
My wheels got in my bag and I got all my feels. I'm getting this paper, I'm stacking a meal. I'm with your hoe in the house on the hills. Yeah. I'ma keep it real, I just sacrifice to try to get my bands up. Shorty wanna fuck with me, she see me on the camera. She said she in love with me, but really I can't stand her. She just want part of this life cause she see me on the ground.
Chapter 1. The life of Izuku Midoriya. People are not born equal. In this society you are either born with power, or you don't have any. Those with the right quirks are praised, people believe in them. Those with none are considered worthless, near subhumans. It's a fate feared by every 4-year-old until their quirk appears. Kids are fools. In this society there is something that can be even worse than being born quirkless. Both fates cannot be changed. At least that is what most think. The classroom was filled with happy chatting, as happy as you could be in the beginning of a new school day. That changed as soon as the first person turned to look at who had just arrived. "Watch out," the student said. All chatter ended right away. Everyone's eyes followed young Izuku Midoriya as he walked across the classroom. None of the looks were friendly, but one specific pair of eyes had fire in them. Explosions really. Izuku turned toward the front of the class before approaching Katsuki Bakugo, whose blonde hair looked like it had been blown up by his personality. Izuku quickly got to his desk at the front corner of the class, right next to the windows, and took his seat. The desks around us had all been pulled away from him to create open space around him on all sides, just enough to be out of arm's reach. Even the teachers rarely got any closer than that, even if Izuku needed their help. At least people weren't constantly mocking and actively beating him like before. Ever since his hair had lost its green, it had become like a lighthouse warning other students to stay away. He was alone, but at least he didn't need to look over his shoulder every few seconds. Sometimes he didn't know which was better. Another lesson passed uneventfully as Izuku focused on studying. Most of his classmates had already left as he got his stuff back into his backpack and he let the rest file out rather than pushing through the crowd. He was mostly successful. Thinking the path was clear, he walked out of the classroom briskly to make it to his next class. Of course, he bumped against the last person he wanted to. Bakugo only needed a glimpse of Izuku to jump away and bring his hand up, small explosions sparking on his palm. "What are you trying to do, thief?" Bakugo screamed at Izuku. "I didn't try anything. I'm just going to the next class," Izuku answered with a tired voice and a blank expression. "Yeah, sure. Need to study hard to get to the best villain school? Oh wait, those don't exist. You'd be better off just dropping out. It's not like you'd end up on the streets with that rich dad of yours. And quat." Bakugo pointed at Izuku's expensive wristwatch. Izuku brought his other hand protectively over the watch. "At least the rest of us wouldn't need to deal with your shit." Bakugo turned and left. Some nearby students stared at Izuku. Someone snickered. No one came within an arm's reach of Izuku, who was staring at the floor and glanced at his hands and his watch. With a sigh he continued walking to the next class, trying to leave everyone else as much space as he could. Of course, that took time and he'd probably be the last one to class again. "Is something wrong, young Midoriya?" Hearing the first friendly words of the day since leaving home, Izuku looked up at his geography teacher. "Just the usual, Kuro-sensei," Izuku answered. "I ran into Bakugo after the last lesson." "I see," the teacher said. The young man was the only one in the school that actually treated Izuku well, including the staff. He could even get angry at how Izuku was treated. Even now trails of dark mist leaked from behind his ears and across his face like it often did when they talked. Sensei, your quirk," Izuku pointed out. "Thank you for noting that." The teacher controlled his quirk, making the mist disappear, and gestured Izuku to enter ahead of him. Inside, the students nearest to his desk had already moved theirs further away, but Kuro-sensei would have none of that. "Put your desks back where they are supposed to be. This mess is disrespectful and makes my classroom look disorganized." The students knew there was no point complaining, so they did as told, but they were not happy about it. Izuku wasn't sure if Kuro-sensei's support in this did more harm than good to him, but he appreciated the teacher's gesture nevertheless. It was the only class where people would not make nasty remarks at Izuku and get away with it. After the lesson he stayed put even after every other student left the room. "Young Midoriya, you shouldn't allow their prejudice and fear to affect your self-worth. They're only acting like this because society has taught them to, as unfortunate as it is. That doesn't help much since I still need to live in this society, Izuku responded and got up. I didn't fit what it expects people to be when I was quirkless and my quirk just made things worse. Sorry, I shouldn't burden you with my problems. You shouldn't worry about that, Midoriya. Helping with your problems is my job here. That includes you making it to the next class in time, so I must ask you to go now. Thank you, Izuku said as he left the room. It was his last conversation for the school day and eventually that too was over. Izuku walked out of the school gate and headed home. He never took the direct route home, a habit from when Bakugo and others might ambush him to get some entertainment out of the quirkless kid. Now it gave him some peace to think either alone or surrounded by people that didn't know or avoid him. He pulled out his quirk analysis notebook. Even if he wouldn't be accepted as a hero, even if society hated him for his quirk, quirks were still too interesting for him to not analyze them and the people that use them, heroes especially. He began mumbling and writing as he walked. Izuku put his notebook away after writing down his most recent thoughts and looked around. He had come further away than he thought, and the area didn't look very good. He got his bearings and headed straight home. His route went through a bit of a shady underpass. Izuku stopped to check it out before going through. He was almost at the end of the tunnel when he heard steps behind him. Glancing back, a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, had entered the tunnel. He was alone and it was a public street, but Izuku got a bad feeling about the man. His eyes were too focused on Izuku, so he started walking faster. He was almost out of the tunnel. He figured he could make it. A van drove into his line of sight and stopped suddenly, just a few meters in front of Izuku, blocking the tunnel exit. He turned away just as the side door of the van opened, but before he could run, the man that had followed him rushed at him. The man collided with Izuku and pushed him back as two pairs of hands grabbed him from behind. He was still processing what had happened when the group pulled him into the van. As the door started closing, something clicked inside Izuku and he started fighting back with a new fervor. The two men behind him were still holding onto his arms, so he started kicking towards the face of the man that had pushed him while screaming his lungs out. "Shut up, little fucker," the man in front of him said as the door snapped shut and the van began moving. He grabbed Izuku's legs, but Izuku kept wiggling and fighting and hit the man in the face. The next moment a torching heat glowed against his face. The man had let go of one of his legs and flames burst from the back of the man's hand like a flaming sword that moved towards Izuku's neck. The flames filled his vision. He could still move his hand below his elbow and in desperation he reached up to grab the arm wielding the flaming blade. There was no way he could stop the man if he wanted to kill him. There was only one way: he could at least try to fight back. It was just hard to remember how to do it while being kidnapped. As his hand grabbed the attacking man's arm, Izuku drew a deep breath. Everyone stopped. Izuku didn't struggle physically, too focused on using his quirk, and the trio attacking him just held him. "What the?" The man Izuku grabbed shouted and pulled his arm free. "Ah, what's happening to my quirk?" With one man off him, Izuku started struggling again, trying to twist his hand to grab another. "Don't let him touch you." A hold on one of Izuku's arms loosened and a hand was placed on the back of his head. His entire world shook and an immense pain struck his head. His vision blurred and a fraction of a second later everything went black. The first sensation telling Izuku that he was still alive was a squeezing pain around his wrists from having his hands tied up in front of him, and a similar pressure around his legs. He was laying on the floor in a corner of some room. His vision was still blurry, but he could make out moving outlines in the well-lit room and his ears worked just fine. "At least we got someone worth ransoming this time. Look at this watch. Better than the last time. So much time for nothing." Maybe it would not have been for nothing if you didn't get impatient and turn her insides to jelly. "You better hope that this one actually wakes up so we can get his parents' number." "He's fine. I can control my quirk when I want to." "Damn it." A third person shouted. Izuku recognized it as the man with the fire quirk. "Still nothing?" Another man asked. "No, I can't use it at all. Whatever that brat did, it's like my quirk is gone. I can't feel anything. We aren't ransoming him anywhere until he fixes this, and if he doesn't, the fucker will wish you had turned his brain to jelly." Izuku's vision was getting a little better, so he saw the group of men turn and notice his wakefulness. All of them had covered their heads with ski masks. "See, I told you I didn't shake him too hard." The man had not even finished speaking when the freshly quirkless kidnapper ran to Izuku and dragged him up from the collar of his shirt. He punched Izuku on the face, making his vision go fuzzier again for a moment. Izuku stared at the man, dazed. "What did you do to my quirk?" Izuku didn't immediately answer, so the man punched him again. Izuku gasped and let out a cry of pain. "So you can still make some noise. Good. Now what did you do to my quirk?" And quat. Izuku paused to cough and gag. It was a miracle he hadn't already emptied his stomach on the floor, which seemed to be spinning now. He stayed up only because he was held so by his attacker. "Destroyed it. It's my quirk. Quirk." Deletion, Izuku fumbled out the half-truth. He received another punch, this time to the stomach. His stomach finally giving up as vomit burst up his throat. The newly quirkless man let go and jumped away from him. Izuku fell down hard and kept vomiting on the floor. His still seething attacker stomped away to the other end of the room, leaving Izuku next to the puddle of what had a few hours ago been his lunch. A door somewhere nearby creaked open and there was a repetitive knock against the door. Izuku turned his head to see the new arrival, some old man. So, what is going on here? You having trouble with a kid? That isn't just any kid. The brat destroyed my quirk. What do you mean destroyed? That isn't possible. Well, he did it, grandfather. That brat grabbed my arm when we captured him and then I couldn't use my quirk at all, like it was just gone. Izuku, now no longer vomiting, pushed himself away from the stinky puddle and rolled a bit so his face wasn't pressed against the floor. The old man seemed to look at him. You said your quirk is gone or was destroyed. How do you know that? There could be many reasons why you can't use it. The brat said so, and I know about erasure quirks. Those shouldn't have worked when he was unconscious. They're ... and quat. The old man paused, staring at Izuku. Was he scared? There is another type of quirk that could cause that. Your generation might not be familiar with it, but any villain of my age has at least heard the stories of a man with a quirk to take quirks. The old man walked closer to Izuku with the group of younger villains in tow. Izuku could only lay there and watch them approaching. The old man met his gaze. Tell me the truth. Is your quirk to destroy quirks? He paused, or to steal them? Izuku blinked. How did he know? The old man held his chin. This could be bad. Behind the group a spiral of darkness suddenly appeared and extended to cover most of the wall. Izuku could only stare and wonder why the dark mist seemed so familiar. A few seconds later, the old villain and his thugs turned around to face the mist just as two people stepped through it. One of them was completely covered in the same black mist, only his clothes visible outside of it. The other was dressed in a regular black suit but his entire head was covered by a black helmet with a lower part that covered his entire neck with a thick metal collar. Chapter 2. Rescue and Reunion. The two strange men wordlessly stepped in front of the group of criminals as the misty portal disappeared behind them. Get them! One of the younger criminals shouted. A bunch of them charged at the new arrivals, but never got close. A dark cloud burst out of the man covered in it, almost as if his very body consisted of mist. In seconds half of the room was completely filled with darkness that covered the attacking men. A few yelps of surprise and fear were the last signs of the men that had attacked the new duo. As the mist retracted there was nothing left of them, not even bloodstains. Considering how the duo arrived it had to be some kind of transportation quirk. The two remaining villains backed closer to Izuku as the misty man approached. Kurogiri, the masked man said. They are mine. Yes, master. The misty man stepped aside but even then his yellow glowing eyes seemed to focus on Izuku from behind the mist. The man he called master walked closer. The old man standing above Izuku started shaking. Could it be, he said, all for one? So you know me, the masked man said and chuckled. The sound made Izuku shiver. It wasn't a happy chuckle. The sound promised pain. Yes. Master, the old man said. I used to lead one of your enforcer teams in Tokyo until All Might destroyed our operation. Then you disappeared. I thought you were dead. Many do, the masked man, all for one, answered. The old man lowered himself to his knee. I may not have known of your survival, but I have never forgotten your great gift you gave me. I am at your command if you accept my service again. I might have considered that. Your age provides you experience many of my allies lack. However, the masked man looked downwards, at Izuku. You know too much, and your men attacked my son. Izuku stared at the man too dizzy and confused to think straight. It took a while before he even understood what word the man had said. The smell of his own vomit was mixed with a new stench as the old man soiled his pants. Hey, you really know this guy? The younger man said. He sounded like the one that had talked about shaking Izuku. The man called all for one raised his hand, his palm toward the old man, and a second later a spray of blood rained over Izuku. He felt like vomiting again as the iron scent entered his nose, but he was pulled up as two arms snaked under his armpits and pressed their palms against his chest. Don't get any closer or the kid gets it. My vibration quirk can turn his insides into mush before you can stop me. And quat. Izuku, realizing the danger, started struggling against the man's hold. Let me go, he cried out and raised his tied up arms, trying to hit his attacker's head behind him. He didn't manage it as the man blocked his hands with one of his own. Even in the haze from all his injuries, Izuku was still thinking analytically enough to see the man's mistake. He managed to grab the arm blocking his strike. The man remembered who he was dealing with. When he realized his mistake, it was already too late. Izuku felt a small shock against his chest, but as the man's quirk left him there was no longer enough power to cause any serious damage. No. The man shouted. Something yanked him back. His arms let go of Izuku but not before they pulled Izuku to fall on his back. He hit his head and before blacking out again barely saw tendrils of black mist flowing around the freshly quirkless man, like dark fingers of death pulling him into a cloud of black as the man's face twisted in horror. The blunt force trauma he suffered is not an issue even without quirk-based treatment, someone said in the darkness. He sounded familiar. The real damage was caused by a quirk, most likely the same one that he took. Creating strong vibrations inside the skull could be the cause of this damage. Is it permanent? Asked a voice that sounded like the man called All for One. It could have been, but if you are willing to use your quirks it is not beyond our capabilities to ensure a rapid and complete recovery. He will still need several treatments over a few weeks. I don't have anything against that though. He is the second person ever to manifest the All for One after all. You can do what you want of the men Kurogiri sent as long as they never get to talk to anyone again, but Izuku is not for you to experiment on. It would be a nuisance if I had to find people to replace you after all this time. Someone stepped next to Izuku and touched his forehead. A green glow filled his vision even through his closed eyelids. As soon as it began Izuku's pulsing headache eased up a bit and he sighed in relief. You're awake, the man said. The hand left Izuku's forehead as he opened his eyes. It was the man with a black helmet, except the top of the helmet was gone revealing. Izuku didn't know if he could even call it a face. The man's bald head was completely scarred and where his eyes should have been, was covered with skin. There wasn't much else to see since his nose and mouth were covered by some kind of breathing mask attached to the lower part of the helmet around his neck. Izuku didn't dare to move and just stared at the faceless man that had killed a man in front of his eyes. The fact the old man had been the criminal behind his kidnapping didn't erase the blood that had hung around Izuku like fine iron mist. Still, something in the man, his voice felt familiar. Izuku's eyes sprung wide open as he remembered what the man had called him earlier. That voice, now that it wasn't as distorted by the helmet, a little kid inside Izuku recognized that voice even after all the years. It couldn't be. Without even thinking the word escaped his lips. Dad? Yes, Izuku. It can't be, Izuku said. This had to be some scheme. The man claiming to be his father put his hand in his jacket and pulled out a single photograph. He held it for a moment and handed it to Izuku, who recognized his mother in the picture instantly, and also himself as a little kid, and then there was a white-haired man. This was his family. Izuku looked at the faceless man. This was his family too. If that is not enough evidence, we also seem to have the same quirk. Your hair even went white like mine when your All for One manifested. As he spoke, the man raised his hand to Izuku, showing a small hole in the middle of his palm. Izuku looked at his own hand, which too had had a similar hole since his quirk appeared. The man put his hand back on Izuku's head and the green glow returned. All for One? It is the true name of our quirk and the name people know me with. I just called it quirk transfer, Izuku muttered. So, you really are my dad. And you are. Are you a villain? Depends on what do you consider a villain. You're trying to avoid my question. A villain is a villain, Izuku said. I could say the same to you. Villain is a villain? That sounds like something your classmates might say to you. That someone is a villain because they say he is a villain. It is the same with society. If those in charge, if the majority of people would judge you for your quirk or quirklessness, and say you are a villain, he paused. Are you? I know you've been called one. Izuku stared at him as the words sunk in, bringing up memories of all the times people had called him a villain. How do you know? Was all he could say. I've stayed away from you and Inko for obvious reasons, he gestured at his missing face, to keep you two separate from my business, but I still kept an eye on you in case something happened. How do you think I knew that you had been kidnapped? Kurogiri, come here. The black mist-covered man walked into Izuku's vision. The mist around his head twisted and split, briefly revealing a bit of a human face. Kuro-sensei? Izuku said. Yes, his father answered. He is one of the people that have been keeping an eye on you and Inko for me. Luckily you wore the watch I sent you. It has a tracker in it. Kurogiri handed Izuku his fancy wristwatch and phone that his kidnappers had taken. Izuku quickly grabbed the watch and held it tightly in front of his teary eyes. I didn't have many things from you, Izuku said. I wanted to hang on to at least that one thing. It felt like someone was there even all the times I was alone. This wasn't what I expected. I did not think it would be, All for One said. To answer your previous question, I am considered a villain of the highest degree. I have sought to change society in many ways over a very long time. With the power of our quirk, it was easy to gain support, but that comes with increased opposition. People can worship or fear power depending on how they perceive it. I don't need to tell you how people view our power. In the end, those who would oppose me were able to dictate how the society would work with the help of people with powerful and flashy quirks that people saw as heroic. Anyone who opposed them, anyone who even used the quirks they were born with without their permission, was declared a villain. Even anyone associated with a person considered a villain would be ostracized. Often just having been born with the wrong quirk is enough for that. That is a large part of why I left you even before my injuries. You killed that old man, Izuku accused. The one whose gang kidnapped and very nearly gave you permanent brain damage? Yes, I did, and he was the lucky one among them. Kurogiri did not give the rest of them the mercy of a quick death. They did not deserve one, Kurogiri said. Only now Izuku noticed that his teacher's mist was flowing around him on the bed. Izuku didn't want to ask what they meant, but the misty gesture felt strangely comforting, and whatever healing quirk his father was using on him really eased the pain in his head. You do not need to accept everything I have done, All for One said. You may know about me now, but you are also old enough to decide if you still want to have nothing to do with me. After you have properly recovered, we will need to see a few times for your treatments. I can also help you understand your quirk better. No one else in this world can, so you should consider it carefully. Izuku looked at his hand again. He shouldn't have kept talking with this man. Father or not, he admitted to being a villain and had just killed someone. But Izuku couldn't really deny what the man had said. He felt similarly in many things whether he said it aloud or not. There was also Kuro-sensei, or Kurogiri. I don't know much about it. I accidentally took Bakugo's quirk. I haven't used my quirk since I figured how to give Bakugo his back. I didn't want to steal anyone's quirk. Until today, All for One said. You took a quirk from the man that threatened your life. How do you feel about that? I don't know, and I actually took the quirks from 2 of them. 2 in one day, All for One muttered. I would ask how you feel, but with your other injuries there's no point. What do you mean? This is one of the things you need me to teach you. Usually, humans only have a single quirk, and for most that is all their body can take. They might survive having a second quirk, but there could be side effects depending on the quirks. A few people can have dual quirks or just bodies that are naturally more adaptable. Our quirk itself allows us to amass a large number and our bodies adapt to them, but that will take time. You have gained 2 new quirks in a single day with no previous training or experience. You may feel some side effects until your body adjusts. Izuku brushed his chin. If everything going on wasn't so overwhelming, he would have already descended into unending analysis and muttering. That makes sense, I guess. I've never actually thought about that. I didn't think I would ever take anyone's quirk again. It is what your classmates and society would expect from you. To deny and suppress your abilities for no other reason than that they don't like it. I often feel like that, but they aren't totally wrong. Stealing people's quirks isn't exactly the right thing to do. I sure hope you aren't stupid enough to believe that after today, if you had some flashy super strength quirk you could have punched them to defend yourself. How would that be any better than using your All for One to take their quirks? If you wanted to not injure or kill them, that would be even better than many quirks that are considered heroic. All for One took his hand off Izuku and the green glow disappeared. That is all I can do today. You should try to sit up. All for One stepped further from the bed to give Izuku more space as he sat up. Cables hanging from his head hit his arms and back. The pulsing headache had returned as soon as his father had stopped using his quirk, but the rest of his pains were gone, and for the first time Izuku looked around the room. It was dimly lit mostly by a single light by Izuku's bed and a computer screen on the other side of the room. Both were surrounded by medical equipment of all kinds. The room was better equipped than most intensive care units. Besides him, his father and Kurogiri, there was one person in the room mostly hidden behind some medical machinery. Don't mind the doctor, All for One said. He doesn't yet wish to show his face to you. Just know you can thank him for treating both of us. Izuku looked towards the hidden man. Thank you, I feel a lot better. Nervous and polite as ever, I see, the man responded. Did he too know Izuku? He sounded familiar. If you can walk straight, you're free to go for today, as far as I am concerned. Izuku breathed in deep once and got on his feet. Luckily there was no dizziness, just the headache. He looked up at his father's missing face. Sue. What now? You will need to come back a couple of times to complete your treatment. After that, as I said, you're old enough to decide. You can continue your life as it is, and I will be working abroad as before. All for One paused. Or if you want to stay in touch and keep training your quirk, we can do that, but there are risks and coming back home is no longer an option for me either way. I'm not sure. You don't need to decide today, except on one thing. One thing? Your mother. Izuku's eyes went wide. How late was it? His mother had to be worried sick. She figured out I was a villain but does not know even the amount you now know. She has always said you work abroad, Izuku said. That is the excuse I gave. I don't think she ever truly believed it. She won't be happy about us meeting like this, even less for your kidnapping and injury. I am not going to lie to her, Izuku said without hesitation. He looked down at his bloodstained clothes and was grateful he had already emptied his stomach. Not that I could. Very well. I trust you try to keep her quiet about this. Your life will only become harder if people hear you are the son of someone society considers a villain. Holding back Kurogiri might be difficult if that happens. Izuku glanced at the misty figure. Is he going to stay at my school? Yes, and he will bring you here any time you want. You already saw his quirk. Some kind of teleportation. Warp gate, Kurogiri corrected. Are you going to send me home with it? Yes, when you are ready. Izuku looked at his father. I will talk with Mom. I have to think about this and I can't decide based on just one side of the story. All for One's cheeks tensed around his breathing mask as if he was smiling. At least she managed to raise an intelligent child. Talk with Kurogiri tomorrow. He will bring you to continue the treatment after school. Izuku nodded and now a familiar misty warp gate formed next to Kurogiri. Izuku looked at it for a moment, resisting the urge to ask more questions and analyze the quirk. Instead he stepped through without another word. A swirling darkness surrounded him for a moment until the world got less dark and buildings materialized around him. He was standing right next to his house. Looking at the nice two-story building he couldn't help thinking that it was his father, this villain called All for One, that had made sure they could live so comfortably, sending money that he supposedly earned working abroad. Years earlier, finding out that Izuku had a bigger house had irritated Bakugo to no end. Izuku walked straight through the yard, his mother's pride, and opened the door. Yes, he heard his mom talking. My friend whose son goes to the same school confirmed that he left school normally, but that was hours ago. No, he usually takes a walk after school, but he never goes anywhere for long without letting me. Izuku stepped into the living room where his teary-eyed mother was talking on the phone. She raised her head. Izuku and quat. Chapter 3, Mom and Dad. The phone fell on the large sofa as Inko Midoriya jumped up and ran to her son with the speed of an Olympic sprinter. She stopped in front of Izuku like she had been hit by a paralyzing quirk. Her eyes widened at the sight of blood droplets all around his clothes and the lingering stink of vomit. Tears started to flow from her eyes, probably enough that it could have washed away the blood. Wah! Blood. Izuku, are you okay? What happened? Does it hurt anywhere? I'm going to call help. She spoke so fast her sentences started blurring together, but the last part was completely clear. Izuku's eyes widened and turned towards the sofa where the phone still waited, probably in the middle of a call to the police. He grabbed his mother's arm just in time before she got out of reach and back to the phone. He pulled her close. He whispered, afraid the phone might pick up sounds from afar. You can't talk to the police or anyone. Izuku, what is going on? She asked, thankfully more quietly than before. I saw Dad. His mother's eyes widened and glazed over for a moment. After recovering she looked at his bloodstained clothes again. Not either of ours. He saved me. I will explain everything, but ... and quat. Izuku glanced at the sofa. We don't want to talk to police right now. I think. Please Mom. She stared at his eyes and slowly nodded. Her steps were shaky as she walked to the sofa. Hello, yes I'm still here. Sorry, he just came back home. I may have overreacted. He's my everything. No, he doesn't he. Apparently his father showed up suddenly and wanted to talk to him. No, I can take care of my own family matters. Yes, I will call if something bad happens. I'm sorry for taking your time. She put down the phone and collapsed on the sofa. Mom. Izuku rushed to her side. He took her hand in his and put the other on her shoulder. He breathed a little easier seeing she was still conscious, just shocked by everything that had happened. Mom, breathe. It took her a few seconds to calm down and sit upright on the sofa. She tapped the spot next to her. You should sit. If we are going to talk about your father, it will take time. Izuku moved to do as she asked but remembered his tainted clothes. He took off his school uniform shirt and pants and put them on the table before sitting down on the clean expensive sofa. His mother drew deep breath. Okay, tell me everything that happened. Promise you won't freak out? Izuku asked. If you have to ask that I can't promise I won't, she answered. I got kidnapped by some gang when I was walking home from school. She started immediately breathing faster. He grabbed her hand and leaned closer to pull her against him. He spoke quietly once their heads were touching. I'm here Mom. I'm safe. Dad saved me. He did? Wait, did he work with the kidnappers? She pulled away from the hug to meet Izuku's eyes. No, I think their leader used to work for Dad at some point but, Izuku paused, that blood is his. I know Dad is considered a villain, but he has still been keeping an eye on us. Izuku explained to her what had happened during his kidnapping. His mother's expression briefly changed from tense fear to surprise when Izuku talked about using his quirk. She settled on somewhere between fear and anger after he started telling her what had happened after his father arrived. So, he was lying about his quirk. I suspected that when your hair changed to look like his when he wasn't coloring it. Please tell me he at least took care of you afterwards. Using a quirk on someone's head like that. He did, Mom, Izuku assured and continued the story about how Dad had taken him to, well, he didn't know where, and helped him there with some doctor. He briefly referenced their talk about what is a villain but focused more on why his father had left them, how they would be in danger if they were connected to him and about their quirk. Inko managed to keep seemingly calm but Izuku could feel her squeezing his hand. He rubbed his forehead with his free hand. His mother snapped out of her thoughts and stared at him. Are you okay? Mostly, Izuku answered. Dad's doctor said I could have had permanent brain damage from that quirk that knocked me out, but Dad had some healing quirk. They said they need to treat me a few other times before it completely heals. So, you are going to see him again? Yes, at least until I recover and, Izuku paused and looked down, face tense and fresh tears falling on the sofa. I need to know more about him. Even if he is a villain. I've spent too many years missing him even when I couldn't remember his face anymore. I don't think I can. Izuku, his mother cried and pulled him into a hug. Izuku had inherited her tear ducts, so both their shirts got soaked before they started talking again. I'm so sorry. He has been gone so long I didn't consider you might still be missing him. While I just ignored your questions and lied about where he was. I won't stop you from talking to him, but only once I see him. Izuku pulled back from the hug. Mom, are you sure? He asked only to receive the sternest look she could come up with. He is still a villain who might be plotting something. He is also my husband. Do not forget that. Now, how are you planning to meet him again? The guy with a warping quirk that helped Dad keep an eye on us, at least me, he's a teacher at my school. He's supposed to take me after school. Then I'll be there, she said in her this discussion is over voice. She looked at the bloodstained clothes, holding in more tears, and got up. I should wash those. There's food on the stove. She pointed at Izuku and switched to her most commanding voice that Izuku hadn't heard in years. Don't go anywhere and lay down if you start feeling worse in any way. Yes, Mom, Izuku responded and went to eat. After sitting down by the dining table, he raised his hand to look at the palm and the little hole in it. All for one, he muttered and turned his hand around. He should now have those other two quirks permanently. He tried to focus on the blade-like fire quirk. When he accidentally took Bakugo's quirk, there was a strange feeling with his own quirk itself and mentally reaching for it. A flicker of fire appeared on the back of his hand and quickly spread into an oval-shaped mass of flames. Luckily it didn't really burn him, though he could feel the uncomfortable heat. He was lucky he had taken off his long-sleeved top shirt before trying the quirk. It still didn't look like what he had been threatened with. He stared at the flame, breathing a little faster with every passing moment. Izuku? He spun around, raising his hand and open palm towards the sound. His fingers touched the flame he was still producing. He yelped at the same time as his chair fell on the ground. The fire disappeared and Izuku was left facing his mother, about to wash the floor with her tears again. Izuku stared at her for a while as his breathing calmed down. Sorry, Mom, he said. I don't think I'm as okay from that kidnapping as I thought. He glanced at his burned fingers. His mother grabbed his wrist and dragged him to the sink. Cold water felt good. They spent the rest of the evening sitting together, except when they got Izuku's clothes. His mother even tucked Izuku into bed for the first time in years. It didn't help him sleep any better though. She barely let him leave to school on his own, checking the bandages on his fingers before he left. At least Izuku's head didn't cause any big problems. Just some dizziness when he got up, and he didn't tell his mother about that. At school no one cared about him being injured or repeatedly rubbing his forehead. He had felt a bit dizzy again by the time he got to school and sat down. Unable to focus, Izuku spent most of the time staring at his bandaged fingers. If he was going to keep the quirks he took, since he didn't expect their owners to show up again, he'd have to learn to control them. Maybe he could even pretend one of them was his when he would go to high school. For a moment Izuku considered asking help from the school's quirk counselor but abandoned the idea. He had asked the man's help exactly once in the past and the answer was the same as everyone else's. His quirk is villainous and the only thing he should worry about should be not using it. Izuku sighed. There was only one person who could really help him control his quirks, at least only one who would. Something slapped him on the shoulder. Izuku's head snapped up to see the quickly retreating hand of a teacher whose quirk let him reach quite far. Since you seem so excited for class, it should be easy for you to solve this equation, the teacher said and pointed to the blackboard. Izuku quickly scanned everything that had been written, calculating as the impatient teacher kept staring at him. Bakugo muttered useless. X equals 5 or -5, Izuku answered. The teacher glanced back at the equation he had written. Correct. That doesn't mean you can slack off. I'm not feeling too well, Izuku said honestly. Sure you aren't. The teacher continued the lesson without paying any more attention to Izuku, despite what he had said. This was a teacher, someone who's supposed to teach them how things worked, but he barely paid attention to the class himself. No wonder his classmates were so uncaring with these kind of adults in their lives. As soon as the class ended Izuku got up and walked out, ignoring classmates who kept a close eye on him as he passed them. He didn't care and headed straight towards the teacher's lounge, scanning for faces until he found who he was looking for. Kuro-sensei. Young Midoriya, do you want to talk about something? Yes, somewhere and quad. Izuku paused when the man put a hand to his shoulder. Small amounts of mist spread from the hand flowing around Izuku's shoulder. It was oddly comforting. Come with me, Kurogiri whispered and gestured for Izuku to step in a nearby small stairwell. As soon as they were out of anyone's sight, a mass of mist encased Izuku. Any time before or with anyone else, Izuku might have been scared at the sudden darkness, but he had learned to relax when with Kuro-sensei. It was genuine relief. He still felt this amount of trust despite finding the teacher wasn't who he thought. The darkness was gone as fast as it came and Izuku was standing on the roof of the school. You wanted to discuss something. I assume you don't want me to take you to master this early. There is actually something I should talk to you about. I think I mostly needed a friend. I've been thinking about everything wrong with this place more than usually. You've been the only nice person in this school, and yesterday, Izuku paused. You didn't talk much, but I could sense how you felt. I wanted to thank you for actually caring. He chose to not ask about the men Kurogiri had made disappear. The man stepped closer, putting a hand on Izuku's shoulder again. It is my duty here to protect you above all else. That is the mission Master has given me. Dad, Izuku said. He said something about holding you back. It's more than a mission, isn't it? Kurogiri didn't say anything, but mist leaked from his head and hands. Izuku smiled. You don't need to answer. There's actually another thing I needed to tell you. Mom wants to come see Dad also. I'm not sure how Master would feel about that, Kurogiri responded. That's why I wanted you to know beforehand. Please let Dad know before we go. I will. Do you wish for anything else? Kurogiri asked. Why are you saying it like you are going to do anything I say? What is thy bidding, my master? Kurogiri said without even the smallest twitch on his face. Izuku chuckled. I didn't know you do movie quotes. I don't, Kurogiri responded with a hint of confusion. Izuku looked at him with the same. The school bell distracted both of them from their thoughts. We should go, Izuku said. He stepped towards a door that led inside, but his vision blurred, and he stumbled after just 2 steps. He was saved from a meeting with the roof by Kurogiri's mist. Thank you, Kuro-sensei. I mean, Kurogiri. You should have told me how serious your symptoms are. It wasn't that bad when I was sitting, and I had to come to school anyway for you. I can't exactly tell the school nurse what happened. That would not help you. I shall send you to your father immediately to ensure your health. I think I can manage. I can't just disappear in the middle of the school day. I will see to it this won't cause you problems. Your health is most important. Izuku closed his eyes, his vision still not normal, now further blurred by a new tear. He rubbed his forehead in resignation. Okay, I admit I'm not feeling that great, but Mom is still coming here after school. You need to bring her when she comes, Izuku said. Kurogiri looked at him for a moment in silence. Will you? Yes, if that is what you wish. Thank you. I have everything I need. You can send me. Mist burst out of Kurogiri, covering him all around and began whirling in front of him to form the warp gate. Izuku looked at the impressive quirk, promising he'd ask 1,000 questions about it sooner or later. He stepped through and in an instant he was in the same dimly lit room as before. His dad, all for one, was sitting in front of a computer with multiple wires and pipes attached to him, especially a big pipe going into his throat. He turned around. For the first time Izuku saw his father's entire face, what was left of it. The only part that looked somewhat normal was his mouth, and it tensed as he noticed Izuku. He didn't question Izuku's early arrival and gestured toward the hospital bed that Kurogiri had warped Izuku next to. He welcomed the chance to lay back down. How are you feeling? He asked. He typed something on the computer and came to sit next to Izuku. He brought his hand to Izuku's forehead. The familiar green glow appeared, immediately easing Izuku's headache. The doctor said I was good to go if I could walk straight. I don't think I can anymore. Sitting wasn't too bad all considered. It got worse when I was standing talking with Kuro-sen. Kurogiri, Izuku explained, already feeling a little better. His father smirked. You did right to talk with him. My quirk should be more efficient now that you are still rested from the night. If you can call that rest, Izuku responded quietly and sighed in relief. He was feeling better than he had all day or night. His eyelids slipped closed. Inko? The single word penetrated the darkness of sleep and Izuku blinked, trying to get back to consciousness. His father was still standing next to him opposite to Kurogiri and... Just so you know, I left a letter explaining the situation with someone you don't know. If anything happens to either of us, it goes to police. Mom, Izuku's words were muffled under an oxygen mask placed on his face. She was instantly leaning over him, seemingly ignoring the literal villains in the room. Izuku, what did you do to my baby? That didn't last for long. Father raised one finger. Our baby, And I have been treating him after he sought my help when the symptoms started worsening. He paused for a moment, and when he continued talking, he did so with a steady, calm voice. You may not approve of what I am or that I left you, but believe it or not, I have not forgotten that I am a father. Doesn't look that way to me. The two stood still, glaring at each other, or as much as a faceless man could glare at least. Neither backed down. The edges of Izuku's oxygen mask started getting wet. Stop. Please stop, he cried out, making both his parents turn towards him. Can't we just be a family for one day? Please, I can't even remember when we were all together last. It's the one thing I hoped for even more than getting a quirk. His vision got blurry again, this time from tears, but he could feel two bodies leaning down for one big hug. Well, it seems that this is the end to part 1 of What If Deku Was a Villain. I don't have much more to say, so this is Amaterasu signing out. Have a wonderful day/night, bye.